The Invisible Protector, a story of hidden service. For 6 years, Harold Martinez had pushed his cleaning cart through the marble halls of the Grand Meridian Hotel, invisible to billionaires and politicians who barely noticed the elderly janitor in gray coveralls. But when armed men stormed the penthouse to kidnap tech mogul Zelon Dusk, Harold's movements weren't those of a hotel cleaner. They were something else entirely. Welcome to Hidden Valor. Before we dive into this high-stakes story of unexpected heroism and protective instincts, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Every Guardian story matters. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose 43 stories above Manhattan's skyline, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like a monument to wealth and power. Inside, marble floors polished to mirror perfection stretched beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes, while guests who shaped global economies moved through lobbies that cost millions to design. At 6:30 a.m., Harold Martinez pushed his cleaning cart through the service corridors of the 38th floor, beginning another day of work that had become as routine as breathing. At 68, Harold moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had earned every ache and pain through decades of hard service, but whose mind remained sharp as the day he'd first put on a uniform. His gray coveralls bore the simple patch, "Housekeeping Harold," and to the wealthy guests who occasionally noticed him, that's all he was, part of the hotel's infrastructure, as essential and invisible as the elevator system or the climate control. What they didn't see was the way Harold's eyes automatically scanned each room for potential threats, how he positioned his cart to maintain clear sightlines to exits, or how his weathered hands still moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd once held weapons in defense of others. "Morning, Harold," called Maria Santos, the head of housekeeping, as he checked in at the service station. "Penthouse level today, Mr. Dusk's suite and the conference room." Harold nodded, collecting fresh towels and supplies. Zelon Dusk, the tech billionaire whose companies had revolutionized everything from electric vehicles to space exploration, had been staying in the hotel's most exclusive suite for the past week while conducting high-level business meetings. Harold had cleaned Dusk's suite every day for 6 days, moving efficiently through rooms that cost more per night than Harold's monthly pension. The billionaire barely acknowledged his presence. A nod if Harold was lucky, usually nothing at all. Just another servant maintaining the pristine environment that extreme wealth required. As Harold rode the service elevator to the penthouse level, he reflected on how different his life had become. 30 years as a SWAT commander with the NYPD had been a career built on split-second decisions, tactical precision, and the constant readiness to face danger in defense of others. He'd led hundreds of operations, rescued countless hostages, and trained generations of officers in the art of tactical response. But time and bureaucracy had eventually pushed him toward retirement, and at 62, Harold had found himself facing the question that haunted many retired law enforcement officers. What do you do when your entire identity has been built around protecting others? The answer, for Harold, had been the Grand Meridian Hotel. Not glamorous, but honest work that let him serve others in a different way. The wealthy guests might not need protection from armed criminals, but they deserved to have their space maintained with the same attention to detail that Harold had once brought to tactical operations. At 7:15 a.m., Harold began his work on the penthouse level, starting with the conference room where Dusk would be meeting with representatives from 3 major corporations later that morning. As he dusted mahogany tables worth more than luxury cars, Harold's trained ear picked up the sound of multiple vehicles arriving in the underground garage 38 floors below. Nothing unusual about that. The Grand Meridian hosted powerful people who traveled with security details and entourages, but something about the timing, the coordination of arrivals, triggered instincts that Harold had developed over 3 decades of law enforcement. At 7:47 a.m., as Harold moved his cart toward Dusk's private suite, his instincts proved correct. The elevator doors opened with their usual whisper of expensive engineering, but instead of hotel guests or staff, 5 men in dark clothing stepped onto the penthouse level. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, and the bulges beneath their jackets were too familiar for Harold to mistake. Harold had perhaps 3 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether Zelon Dusk lived or died, whether the wealthiest man in America would become the victim of a kidnapping that would send shockwaves around the world. For 30 years, Harold Martinez had made those kinds of decisions. Today, he would make one more. Harold's response was instantaneous and completely invisible to the armed men who'd just stepped off the elevator. To them, he was just an elderly janitor going about his morning routine, someone so far beneath their notice that he might as well have been part of the hotel's furniture. That invisibility was about to become their fatal mistake. Harold continued pushing his cart at the same steady pace, but everything else about his behavior changed. His eyes began cataloging details with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent 3 decades assessing tactical situations. 5 suspects, all male, estimated ages 25 to 35, all carrying concealed weapons based on their movement patterns and the way their jackets hung. More importantly, they were moving with military-style coordination toward Dusk's suite, suggesting extensive planning and professional training. Harold had dealt with professionals before. As the gunman moved down the hallway, Harold allowed his cart to drift slightly, positioning it between them and the emergency stairwell while appearing to focus on his cleaning supplies. To any observer, he looked like an old man struggling with a heavy cart. In reality, he was cutting off their primary escape route while maintaining his cover. The lead gunman reached Dusk's suite and began working on the electronic lock with equipment that confirmed Harold's assessment. These weren't amateurs looking for a quick score. This was a planned kidnapping operation with sophisticated resources and military-level execution. Harold had approximately 90 seconds before they'd breached the suite where Zelon Dusk was probably having his morning coffee while reviewing financial reports that would influence global markets. Harold made his move. Instead of raising an alarm or running for help, actions that would alert the gunman and likely result in Dusk's immediate death, Harold did something that drew on 30 years of tactical experience. He began turning the penthouse level into a battlefield that favored him over his opponents. First, he used his master key to lock down the main elevator, ensuring that no additional threats could reach the penthouse while also cutting off the gunman's quickest escape route. To anyone monitoring the hotel's systems, it would look like routine maintenance. Second, he activated the fire suppression system in the conference room, creating noise and confusion that would mask his movements while drawing hotel security's attention to the floor. Third, he retrieved an item from the bottom of his cleaning cart that wasn't listed on any housekeeping inventory, a service weapon he'd carried for 30 years and hoped never to need again. As alarms began sounding throughout the building and the gunmen realized their carefully planned operation was beginning to unravel, Harold Martinez transformed from invisible janitor into something far more dangerous, a SWAT commander defending his territory. The first gunman never saw him coming. Harold moved through the penthouse level like a ghost with lethal purpose, using every advantage that 6 years of daily familiarity had given him. He knew which floor tiles creaked, which corners provided cover, which rooms had multiple exits. The gunmen were operating in unfamiliar territory. Harold was defending his home ground. The first takedown was silent and efficient. The gunman posted as rear guard found himself face down on marble flooring before he could process what had happened, his weapon secured and his communications equipment disabled. Harold zip-tied him with restraints from his cart, a precaution he'd maintained since his first day at the hotel, and moved to his next objective. Through the door of Dusk's suite, Harold could hear raised voices in multiple languages. The remaining 4 gunmen had breached the Billionaire's private quarters and were likely restraining him for transport. Harold had perhaps 3 minutes before they realized their rear guard was compromised and either accelerated their timeline or executed their hostage. Harold's tactical training kicked in with the clarity of muscle memory. This was a hostage rescue operation in a confined space with multiple armed suspects and one high-value target. He'd run similar scenarios hundreds of times during his SWAT career, but never in a luxury hotel suite worth $10 million. Harold used his housekeeping master key to access the adjacent conference room, then moved through the connecting door that most guests never noticed. The Grand Meridian's penthouse level had been designed with multiple access points for staff to move invisibly through the space, a feature that now gave Harold tactical advantages the gunman couldn't anticipate. From his position in the conference room, Harold could observe the situation in Dusk's suite through a service window designed for catering access. 4 men with automatic weapons had the tech billionaire restrained in his living room while their leader spoke rapidly into a secure radio. Harold recognized the tactical setup immediately: professional kidnapping with extraction support standing by. These weren't terrorists making a political statement. They were mercenaries executing a precision operation for financial gain, which meant they needed Dusk alive, at least until they reached their extraction point. Harold used that knowledge to his advantage. Instead of attempting a direct assault that would likely result in casualties, Harold began what his SWAT training had taught him to call controlled escalation, forcing the suspects to react to his timeline rather than their own. First, he disabled the building's elevator systems from the penthouse control panel, trapping the gunman on the 43rd floor while ensuring that hotel security and emergency responders could still reach them via the stairwells. Second, he activated every alarm system on the floor: fire, security, and medical emergency, creating a cacophony that would interfere with the gunman's communications while alerting the entire hotel to the crisis. Third, he used the hotel's internal communication system to contact security directly. "Security Command, this is Harold Martinez, housekeeping. I have armed hostiles on the penthouse level holding Mr. Dusk. 5 suspects, automatic weapons, professional operation, requesting immediate law enforcement response and medical standby." The response was immediate. "Harold, this is Chief Roberts. Are you secure?" James Roberts had been the hotel's security chief for 8 years, and unlike most of the guests, he knew exactly who Harold Martinez had been before becoming a janitor. "Negative, I'm engaging." "Harold, wait for backup." But Harold had already moved to his next position. Through the service window, he could see the gunmen growing increasingly agitated as their communications failed and their timeline collapsed. The leader was shouting orders in what sounded like Eastern European accents, while his team prepared to move Dusk toward the emergency stairwell. Harold had perhaps 60 seconds before they left the suite, taking their hostage into the hotel's stairwell, where a running firefight would endanger hundreds of innocent guests. That was unacceptable. Harold Martinez, former SWAT commander, made his final tactical decision of the day. Harold's assault on the penthouse suite was a masterclass in tactical precision that would be studied in law enforcement training academies for years afterward. He moved with the controlled violence of someone who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of hostage rescue, but tempered by the wisdom of age and the understanding that every shot had to count. The entry was through the catering access door, a route that brought Harold into the suite's kitchen area with clear sightlines to the living room where the gunman held Dusk. Harold's first shot disabled the communications equipment that the leader was using to coordinate with his extraction team. The second shot shattered the window that the gunman intended to use for their helicopter extraction. In 3 seconds, Harold had eliminated their ability to call for help and their primary escape route. The gunman's response was immediate but poorly coordinated, exactly what Harold had expected from mercenaries who were excellent at planned operations but struggled with improvisation under pressure. 2 of them moved toward the kitchen, weapons raised, while the other 2 maintained control of Dusk. Harold had anticipated this tactical error and was already in motion, using the suite's expensive furniture as cover while engaging targets with the methodical precision of someone who'd never missed when lives were at stake. The first gunman went down to a leg shot that neutralized the threat without killing, Harold's preferred method when dealing with professionals who might have families. The second found himself facing a 68-year-old man who moved like smoke and shot like a sniper, disarming him with a precision that would have impressed Harold's old SWAT team. Within 90 seconds, 2 gunmen were down and disarmed. Their leader was shouting orders that no one could follow, and Zelon Dusk was beginning to understand that his elderly janitor was something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "Mr. Dusk," Harold called calmly, never taking his eyes off the remaining threats. "When I tell you to move, you're going to walk directly to the bathroom and lock the door. Do you understand?" Dusk, who was accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them, found himself nodding at the quiet authority in the janitor's voice. "Now," Harold said. Dusk moved with surprising speed for a man worth $200 billion, diving into the bathroom as Harold engaged the final 2 gunmen with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. The leader made the mistake of trying to negotiate. "Old man, you don't understand who you're dealing with. We have support, we have extraction, we have—" Harold's response was a shot that removed the gun from the man's hand without damaging anything else, followed by words that carried 30 years of authority. "You had support. You had extraction. Now you have about 30 seconds before the NYPD tactical team arrives, and I promise you they won't be as gentle as I've been." The sound of helicopters approaching the building and boots on the emergency stairwell confirmed Harold's assessment. Hotel security had done their job and professional law enforcement was taking control of the situation. Harold secured his weapon and stepped back, allowing the younger officers to handle the arrests and evidence collection. To them, he was just a hotel employee who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. Only Chief Roberts, who arrived with the tactical team, understood what had really happened. "Harold," Roberts said quietly as paramedics checked the wounded gunman and FBI agents began processing the scene, "that was some of the finest tactical work I've ever seen." Harold was reloading his cleaning cart, trying to return to the invisibility that had protected him for 6 years. "Just doing my job, Chief." "Which job? Janitor or SWAT commander?" Harold looked around the penthouse suite, at the shattered windows and blood on marble floors that would take hours to clean, at the billionaire who was giving interviews to FBI agents about his heroic rescue by a hotel employee whose name he still didn't know. "Both," Harold said quietly. "They're more connected than people think." 3 hours later, the Grand Meridian Hotel had returned to its usual atmosphere of quiet luxury, though the penthouse level remained closed for investigation. Harold sat in Chief Roberts' office, still wearing his gray coveralls, answering questions from FBI agents who were trying to understand how a hotel janitor had single-handedly stopped a professional kidnapping operation. "Mr. Martinez," said Agent Sarah Chen, "your service record shows 30 years with NYPD SWAT, including 15 years as a unit commander, multiple commendations, over 200 successful operations, training certifications that read like a special operations manual." Harold nodded but didn't comment. "What I don't understand," Chen continued, "is why someone with your background became a hotel janitor." Harold was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain a decision that had taken him months to make 6 years earlier. "Agent Chen, do you know what the hardest part of tactical operations is? I imagine it's the life and death decisions under pressure." "No," Harold said. "The hardest part is what happens afterward, when the adrenaline fades, and you go home to dinner, and you try to pretend that the world is a safe place where normal problems matter." Harold looked out the window at the city where he'd spent 3 decades running toward danger that most people never imagined. "For 30 years, I was the person who got called when everything else had failed. Hostage situations, armed standoffs, terrorist threats. I got very good at solving problems with tactical precision and controlled violence. And then I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life in a world where those skills weren't needed, where the biggest crisis was replacing towels, and the most dangerous thing I faced was a clogged drain." Agent Chen studied him carefully. "But those skills were needed today." "Today was an exception," Harold said firmly, "and I hope it stays that way." There was a knock on Roberts' door. "Come in," the security chief called. Zelon Dusk entered, looking unlike any billionaire Harold had ever seen. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and his expression was that of someone who'd just discovered that the world was far more dangerous than his wealth could protect him from. "Mr. Martinez," Dusk said, "I wanted to thank you personally." Harold stood, extending his hand. "Just doing my job, sir." Dusk shook his hand, but his expression suggested he was struggling with something. "Mr. Martinez, I have to ask, I've been staying in this hotel for a week, and I've seen you cleaning my suite every day. I never really noticed you." "Most people don't, sir. That's part of the job." "But you noticed me. You knew my routine, my schedule, my security arrangements well enough to predict how those men would try to take me." Harold nodded. "Situational awareness was part of my previous career." Dusk was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Martinez, I'd like to offer you a position with my personal security team. The salary would be—" Thank you, sir, but I'm happy with my current job. But surely you'd prefer work that utilizes your actual skills and experience. Harold smiled, the first time anyone in the room had seen him look truly relaxed. Mr. Dusk, with respect, my actual skills are what saved your life today. But my experience has taught me that the best protection is usually invisible, routine, and comes from people who understand their environment better than anyone else. I don't understand. For 6 years I've been watching over this hotel and everyone in it. Not as a security guard or a bodyguard, but as someone who belongs here, who sees things that others miss, who's trusted enough to have access to every room and every floor. Harold paused, choosing his words carefully. Your regular security team is excellent, Mr. Dusk, but they're obvious. Everyone knows they're there to protect you. The men who tried to kidnap you planned for them, expected them, developed countermeasures for them. But they didn't plan for you. They didn't even see me. To them, I was just part of the background, as invisible as the furniture. That invisibility saved your life. Dusk nodded slowly, beginning to understand. You're saying that the best protection comes from people who don't look like protectors. I'm saying that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one that nobody notices. That evening, Harold Martinez returned to his small apartment in Queens, carrying a day that had transformed him from invisible janitor back into tactical operator and then into something entirely new, a guardian who could be both. His apartment was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with walls that held 30 years of commendations, photographs from SWAT operations, and mementos from a career spent protecting others. But the space also reflected his new life, books about hospitality management, schedules for his hotel shifts, and thank you cards from guests who'd appreciated his quiet service. Harold's phone rang at 8:30 p.m. The caller ID showed Roberts, James, Security. Harold, I wanted to check on you. Today was necessary, Harold said. Nothing more, nothing less. The FBI wants to debrief you tomorrow, standard procedure for civilian involvement in federal cases. I'll be there. Roberts was quiet for a moment. Harold, I have to ask, are you planning to continue working at the hotel? After today, I mean. There might be attention, media interest, people asking questions about the heroic janitor who saved Zelon Dusk. Harold had been thinking about the same question since leaving the hotel. For 6 years, his greatest asset had been his invisibility, his ability to move through the Grand Meridian as part of the background. Today's events had shattered that anonymity permanently. James, do you remember why I took the job at the hotel? You said you wanted honest work that let you serve others without carrying a weapon. That's still true, but I've learned something today. What's that? Harold looked at the commendations on his wall, then at the hotel employee handbook on his kitchen table. 2 different worlds that had somehow become one. I learned that you don't have to choose between being a protector and being a servant. Today I protected Mr. Dusk not because I was a former SWAT commander, but because I was his janitor. I knew his routines, his space, his vulnerabilities because I'd been taking care of him every day for a week. So you're staying? I'm staying, but things are going to be different. How so? Harold smiled, making a decision that felt as right as any tactical choice he'd ever made. I think it's time for the Grand Meridian to have a director of guest services who understands both hospitality and security, someone who can train the staff to see things they might miss, to recognize threats before they develop, to protect our guests in ways they'll never even notice. Harold Martinez, director of guest services? Harold Martinez, guardian. Same job I've always had, just with a different title and a wider scope. Roberts chuckled. I think the Grand Meridian would be lucky to have you in any capacity. After the call ended, Harold sat in his kitchen, reviewing the events of the day and planning for a future that would combine everything he'd learned from both careers. The wealthy guests at the Grand Meridian deserved to feel safe, but they also deserved to be served with dignity and care. Harold had spent 30 years protecting people through tactical operations. He'd spent 6 years serving them through invisible maintenance. Tomorrow, he would begin a new chapter that combined both approaches. Some guardians carried badges and weapons. Others carried cleaning supplies and master keys. The best guardians carried whatever was needed to keep people safe. 6 months later, the Grand Meridian Hotel had become the most secure luxury destination in Manhattan, though its guests would never have guessed why. Harold Martinez, now director of guest services, had implemented changes that were invisible to visitors but revolutionary in their effectiveness. The housekeeping staff had been trained in observation techniques that helped them recognize suspicious behavior while maintaining their focus on service. The concierge team understood how to assess potential threats among the powerful guests who shaped global politics and economics. Even the kitchen staff knew how to monitor the hotel's various access points while preparing meals worth more than most people's cars. Harold's office was on the executive floor, with windows overlooking Central Park and walls decorated with both his SWAT commendations and thank you letters from guests whose stays had been enhanced by his innovative approach to hospitality. "Mr. Martinez," his assistant announced over the intercom, "you have a call from Mr. Dusk's office." Harold smiled, picking up the phone. Zelon Dusk had become a regular guest at the Grand Meridian, drawn not just by the luxury but by the knowledge that he was probably safer there than anywhere else in the world. "Harold, it's Zelon. I wanted to let you know that I'm bringing a delegation from the European Space Consortium next week. High-profile visit, lots of security concerns." "We'll be ready, Mr. Dusk. The usual penthouse suite?" "Actually, I wanted to ask about that. My security team is recommending additional protection measures, but I told them that the Grand Meridian already has the best security in the world." Harold looked out his window at the city where he'd once chased threats through dark alleys and dangerous buildings. Now he protected people by ensuring that threats never made it past the front desk. "Mr. Dusk, your security team is excellent, and they're welcome to implement whatever measures they feel are necessary. But I can promise you that while you're staying here, you'll be protected by people who understand that the best security is invisible." "People like you?" "People like our entire staff. Every housekeeper, every concierge, every person who serves you dinner understands that their job includes keeping you safe, not because they're trained security officers, but because they care about the people they serve." After the call ended, Harold reviewed the security protocols he'd developed for VIP visits. They were comprehensive but subtle, ensuring that guests felt welcomed rather than watched, protected rather than. Harold typed back, "Just doing my job," Roberts responded. "Which job? Director of Guest Services or Guardian Angel?" Harold smiled, looking around his office at the intersection of hospitality and protection that had become his life's work. "Both. They're the same thing." That evening, Harold walked through the hotel's public areas, observing the gentle ballet of luxury service that kept the Grand Meridian running smoothly. Guests moved through marble lobbies and crystal-appointed dining rooms, unaware that they were protected by a network of caring professionals who'd been trained to see threats before they developed. In the penthouse level, he stopped by the suite where Zelon Dusk had nearly been kidnapped 6 months earlier. The space had been completely renovated, with new security features hidden behind unchanged luxury. To guests, it looked exactly the same. To Harold, it was a fortress disguised as a palace. Maria Santos, now the assistant director of housekeeping, approached with her evening report. "All floors secure, Mr. Martinez. Staff reported no unusual activity. All VIP guests are settled for the evening." "Thank you, Maria. Any concerns for tomorrow?" "The ambassador from Japan is checking in at noon. I've briefed the team on cultural protocols and security awareness." Harold nodded, proud of how his staff had embraced the idea that service and protection were inseparable. They weren't security guards pretending to be hospitality workers. They were hospitality workers who'd learned to protect while they served. As Harold prepared to leave for the day, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from SWAT commander to janitor to something entirely new. A guardian who protected through service, who served through protection. Some heroes wore badges and carried weapons. Others wore name tags and carried cleaning supplies. The best heroes wore whatever was needed to keep people safe while making them feel at home. 1 year after the kidnapping attempt, Harold Martinez received a letter that reminded him why he'd chosen his unique path of service. "Mr. Martinez," the letter began, "my name is Rebecca Chen, and I'm a senior at Columbia studying hospitality management. Last month, I had dinner at the Grand Meridian with my family to celebrate my graduation. During our meal, a man at a nearby table became increasingly agitated and began making threats toward other guests. Within 2 minutes, he was quietly approached by a member of your staff, who somehow diffused the situation without creating a scene or embarrassing anyone involved. The man left peacefully, and most guests never even realized anything had happened. Later, I learned that your hotel trains all staff members to recognize and address potential problems before they escalate. I wanted you to know that this approach inspired my senior thesis on protective hospitality, the idea that the best security comes from genuine care for others. Thank you for showing me that service and protection aren't separate goals, but different aspects of the same mission. Harold placed the letter on his desk, next to similar notes from guests, staff members, and security professionals who'd learned about his work at the Grand Meridian. Each letter reminded him that influence could spread far beyond any single operation or intervention. His phone rang with a call from the hotel's owner, Margaret Ashford, a billionaire philanthropist who'd supported Harold's innovations from the beginning. "Harold, I wanted to let you know that 3 other luxury hotels have asked me about implementing your guest services model. They want to understand how the Grand Meridian achieved a perfect safety record while maintaining the highest guest satisfaction scores in the industry." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that our success comes from understanding that every guest deserves to feel both safe and welcomed, and that the people best positioned to ensure both are the ones who serve them every day. Would you like me to consult with them?" "Only if you're interested. But Harold, I want you to know that what you've built here goes beyond hospitality or security. You've created a model for how people can protect each other through service, how strength and gentleness can work together." That afternoon, Harold walked through the hotel with a group of hospitality students who were studying his approach to guest services. They asked questions about threat assessment, about training staff to observe without surveillance, about creating environments that were both luxurious and secure. "Mr. Martinez," asked one student, "how do you train housekeeping staff to recognize security threats without making them feel like they're spying on guests?" Harold smiled, remembering his own transition from tactical operator to service provider. "You teach them that caring for people's safety is part of caring for their comfort. When you truly want to take care of someone, you naturally notice things that might harm them. But how do you balance protection with privacy? The same way you balance any aspect of good service, by focusing on the guest's well-being rather than your own convenience. Good hospitality has always included an element of protection. We just make it intentional." As the students took notes, Harold realized that his work at the Grand Meridian had become something larger than he'd intended. He wasn't just running a hotel, he was demonstrating a philosophy that service and protection were natural partners, that strength could be expressed through gentleness, that the most effective guardians were often the ones people trusted most. That evening, as Harold completed his final rounds through the hotel, he stopped at the penthouse level where Zelon Dusk was staying during another business visit. Through the service corridor, he could see the billionaire working late in his suite, protected by a network of caring professionals who ensured his safety while respecting his privacy. Harold's phone buzzed with a text from his old SWAT team leader, now retired. "Saw the article about your work in Security Management magazine. Proud of what you've built, Harold. You found a way to keep protecting people without carrying a gun. That takes a different kind of courage." Harold typed back, "Same mission, different tools, still serving and protecting. The best kind of evolution." As Harold left the Grand Meridian that night, he reflected on the path that had brought him from tactical operations to invisible service to something entirely new. Visible service that protected invisibly. For 30 years, he'd run toward danger to protect others. For 6 more, he'd served others while hoping danger would never find them. Now he served others while ensuring that if danger came, it would find a fortress disguised as a palace, defended by guardians disguised as hosts. Some protectors wore uniforms and carried weapons. Others wore name tags and carried genuine care for the people they served. Harold Martinez had learned that the most powerful protection came from combining both approaches, the strength to face threats when they appeared, and the wisdom to create environments where threats rarely appeared at all. The invisible shield was the strongest shield of all.